I was staring at the letter in disbelief when my doorbell rang for the third time that morning, and I knew exactly who it was before I even opened the door. Karen Newman stood on my porch in her crisp white parka, clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield, her perfectly styled blonde hair somehow immune to the February wind whipping through our Denver suburb. Behind her, the mid-morning sun reflected off 6 inches of fresh powder that had fallen overnight, turning Maple Ridge Estates into a winter wonderland. Too bad the view was currently being ruined by the HOA president's presence. "Adam Olson," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm here about your mandatory enrollment in the neighborhood snow removal pool." I leaned against the doorframe, still holding the letter she'd apparently hand-delivered to every house on the block. "Mandatory is a strong word, Karen." Her eyes narrowed. "It's Mrs. Newman when we're discussing HOA business. And yes, mandatory. The board voted last night. Everyone pays $300 into the pool, and we hire Mountain Peak Services to handle all driveways and walkways for the season. Except the season is already half over. We're in February. Which is why it's only 300 instead of 5. You should be thanking me." She tapped her pen against the clipboard with increasing irritation. "The deadline for payment is Friday. That's 3 days from now." I'd lived in Maple Ridge Estates for 2 years, and in that time, Karen Newman had tried to fine me for leaving my garbage cans out 15 minutes too long, attempted to ban my rescue dog because he was possibly part pit bull, and once threatened legal action because my front door was painted navy blue instead of the approved colonial blue. I'd won every single dispute by actually reading the HOA bylaws, something Karen apparently thought was optional. "I'll pass," I said. "I've got my own snowblower. Takes me 20 minutes to do my driveway." Karen's face flushed pink. "This isn't optional. The bylaws state that all homeowners must participate in community improvement initiatives approved by the board. The bylaws state that homeowners may be asked to contribute to initiatives that benefit common areas. Last time I checked, my driveway isn't a common area. The initiative benefits the entire community by ensuring consistent snow removal standards. Then the community can enjoy those benefits. I'll handle my own property." I started to close the door, but Karen jammed her boot into the threshold. "Adam, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Mountain Peak gives us a bulk rate. If people start opting out, the cost goes up for everyone else. Sounds like you should have made it actually optional then. You know, like the bylaws require." Her jaw clenched so hard I could hear her teeth grinding. "Fine. But when Mountain Peak refuses to service any properties because we can't guarantee the numbers, and everyone's driveways are buried under snow, that's on you." She yanked her boot back and stormed down my porch steps, her heels clicking angrily against the wood. I watched her march to the next house, where my neighbor Tom was already opening his door with a resigned expression. I closed my door and looked down at my dog, Rex, who was watching me with his typical golden retriever enthusiasm. "What do you think, buddy? Did I just make an enemy?" Rex wagged his tail, which I took as moral support. The next day, I was in my garage reorganizing my tools when Tom knocked on the open door. He was in his 60s, retired from some corporate job, and one of the few neighbors who'd been friendly when I moved in. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." "What's up?" He glanced back at his house like he was worried someone might be watching. "This snow pool thing, you really not paying?" "Nope, it's not enforceable. Karen's making it up as she goes." Tom sighed. "I figured as much, but my wife already wrote the check. She doesn't want the hassle." "That's fair. It's not a bad service if you actually want it. I just don't like being told it's mandatory when it isn't." "That's Karen for you." He paused, shuffling his feet. Listen, between you and me, a lot of people on the board are getting tired of her. She's been president for 6 years, and every year it's some new scheme to squeeze money out of everyone. Last year it was the security assessment for cameras that never got installed. I remembered that. $350 per household for a security system that would monitor the subdivision entrances. 6 months later, nothing had been installed, and when people asked questions, Karen claimed the vendor had gone out of business and the deposit was non-refundable. "Why doesn't someone run against her?" I asked. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You ever tried to run against someone who controls the ballot counting? Besides, most people just want to keep their heads down. It's easier to pay and forget about it." After Tom left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer and started reading through them carefully. The snow pool letter had cited Section 7, subsection 4, but when I actually read that section, it said nothing about mandatory participation in hired services. It talked about maintaining common areas, which we already did through regular HOA dues. I spent the next hour digging through public records and old board meeting minutes. What I found was interesting. Mountain Peak Services was owned by Gregory Newman, Karen's husband. Suddenly, the mandatory snow pool made a lot more sense. Friday morning arrived and I hadn't paid. I was working from home, designing websites for various clients when my doorbell rang again. This time it was Karen with 2 other board members I vaguely recognized, Linda something and Bob something. They both looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Olson," Karen said formally, "you failed to submit payment for the snow removal pool. As of today, you're in violation of HOA regulations and subject to fines." "What regulations specifically?" She consulted her clipboard. "Failure to participate in community initiatives. That's a $50 fine, compounding weekly until compliance. I'd like to see that in writing, in the actual bylaws, not your interpretation." Linda, a woman in her 50s with graying hair, cleared her throat. "Karen, maybe we should table this until the next board meeting. Get legal to review the language." "We don't need legal," Karen snapped. "The board voted, it's done." Bob, a portly man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, nodded reluctantly. "The vote was official. How many board members are there?" I asked. 5, Linda said. "And how many voted for this?" Silence. Then Linda said quietly, 3-2. "Let me guess. You and Bob voted against it." More silence, which was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to go back and review the actual bylaws. You're going to discover that this snow pool isn't mandatory. And then, you're going to send out a corrected letter making it clear that participation is optional. Or I'm going to send my findings to every household in this subdivision, along with the interesting fact that Mountain Peak Services is owned by Karen's husband." Karen's face went from pink to red to almost purple. "That's slander. It's public record. Gregory Newman filed the LLC paperwork 3 years ago. It's all online." Bob's eyebrows shot up. Linda's mouth fell open. Karen looked like she wanted to spontaneously combust. "The board approved the vendor selection," she said through gritted teeth. "Did the board know about your conflict of interest?" Linda stepped forward, her voice suddenly firm. "No, we did not." "This is ridiculous," Karen sputtered. "Gregory's company submitted the lowest bid." "I'm sure they did. Right before you made it mandatory," I crossed my arms. "Look, I don't care if people want to use your husband's service, but you can't force them to, and you should have disclosed the relationship." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Finally, she spun on her heel and marched away without another word. Linda and Bob stood there looking shell-shocked. "Thank you," Linda said quietly. "Someone needed to say something." After they left, I sat down and did something I probably should have done days ago. I wrote up a detailed email explaining the situation, cited the relevant bylaws, included links to the public records showing Gregory Newman's ownership of Mountain Peak Services, and sent it to every email address I could find for Maple Ridge Estates residents. The subdivision had about 200 homes, and I managed to track down addresses for at least 150 of them. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. The first call was from a woman named Patricia who lived 3 streets over. "Is this true? About Karen's husband?" "Yes, madam." "All verifiable through public records." That explains so much. Last year she pushed through a lawn care service too. I wonder who owned that. The second call was from a younger guy named Marcus. "Dude, you're my hero. I've been wanting to tell Karen to shove it for 2 years." The third call was from Tom. "You've kicked the hornet's nest now. My phone's been ringing off the hook. Half the neighborhood is talking about calling an emergency meeting." "Is that bad? Are you kidding? It's the best thing that's happened to this HOA in years." By evening, I'd received 47 calls and twice as many emails. Most were supportive. A few were angry, accusing me of causing trouble. One particularly nasty email told me I should move if I didn't like the rules, which I found ironic since I was the only one actually following them. The emergency meeting was called for Sunday afternoon at the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early and found the parking lot already packed. Inside, every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. I'd never seen this many residents show up to anything. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, her expression icy. When she saw me, her glare could have frozen fire. Linda called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here to address concerns raised about the snow removal pool initiative." "We're here because Adam Olson has been spreading lies about me and my family," Karen interrupted, standing up. "He's accused me of corruption and self-dealing, and I will not stand for it." "I didn't accuse you of anything," I said from the back. "I stated facts." "You implied that I was enriching my husband at the community's expense. Were you not?" The room erupted. People started shouting questions, talking over each other, demanding answers. Linda banged a gavel repeatedly until the noise died down. "Let's address this systematically," Linda said. "Karen, is Mountain Peak Services owned by your husband?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes." "Did you disclose this conflict of interest to the board when proposing the snow removal pool?" "It wasn't relevant. We followed proper bidding procedures." Bob spoke up for the first time. "Actually, we didn't. You brought Mountain Peak to us as the vendor. There was no bid process," Karen whirled on him. "We've used them before. They're reliable." "That's not the point," Linda said firmly. "The point is disclosure and proper procedure, both of which were violated." A man I didn't know stood up. "I want to know where the money from last year's security assessment went." Another woman stood. "And the special assessment from 2 years ago for playground equipment that never got installed." The meeting devolved into chaos. People were standing, shouting questions, demanding financial records. Karen tried to maintain control, but it was like watching a dam break. Years of frustration and resentment came pouring out. Finally, Tom stood up. His voice cut through the noise. "I move for a vote of no confidence in Karen Newman as HOA president." The room went silent. "Second," someone called out immediately. Linda looked at Karen, then at the crowd. "That's within the rights of the membership. All in favor." A forest of hands shot up. I counted quickly. At least 3/4 of the room. Opposed, maybe a dozen hands, mostly people sitting near Karen. The motion passes. "Karen, I'm sorry, but you're removed as president effective immediately." Karen's face was a mask of shock and rage. "You can't do this. I built this HOA. I've dedicated years to this community." "And we appreciate that," Linda said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But the membership has spoken." Karen grabbed her purse and clipboard and stormed out, her heels echoing in the sudden silence. A few people actually applauded. The rest of the meeting focused on practical matters. Linda agreed to serve as interim president. Bob volunteered to conduct a full financial audit, and then someone asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What about snow removal? We still need our driveways cleared." I raised my hand. "I might have a solution for that." After the meeting, about 30 people surrounded me asking questions. I explained my idea. Mountain Peak was charging the HOA $12,000 for the season to handle 200 homes. That was $60 per house per service, and we typically got snow that needed clearing maybe 8 to 10 times a season in Denver. "I've got a commercial-grade snowblower," I said. "I can do a driveway in 20 minutes. If I hired a couple of people to help, we could handle the whole subdivision for half what Mountain Peak charges." "Would you actually do that?" Tom asked. "Sure, I work from home. My schedule's flexible, and honestly, I could use the extra income." A woman named Jennifer pulled out her phone. "I'll pay you right now. How much?" "How about $30 per service? No contracts, no mandatory pool. You call me when you need your driveway cleared, I come clear it, you pay me. Simple." "That's half the price." "Yeah, but I'm one guy with a snowblower, not a company with overhead." "Two guys," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Marcus, the younger guy who'd called me earlier. "I've got a plow attachment for my truck. I'll split it with you 50-50. By the end of the evening, I had 43 people signed up for my snow removal service. I'd scribbled names and addresses on a notepad, and Marcus and I had exchanged numbers to coordinate. "You realize you just started a business," Tom said, grinning. I guess I did. The next morning, I woke up to 3 inches of fresh snow and 17 text messages. Everyone wanted their driveways cleared before work. Marcus and I divided up the addresses geographically. He took the south end of the subdivision with his truck. I took the north with my snowblower. I started at 6 in the morning. The snowblower hummed to life, cutting clean paths through the powder. By 7:30, I'd finished my first 10 driveways. People came out to thank me, offering coffee and tips. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived alone, actually hugged me. "You're so much faster than Mountain Peak," she said. "And friendlier, too." By noon, Marcus and I had finished all 43 properties. We met back at my house to settle accounts. I'd cleared 26 driveways, he'd plowed 17 with his truck. At $30 each, we'd made $1,290 in 6 hours. "Split that $645 each," Marcus said, doing the math on his phone. "Not bad for a morning's work. And it's only going to grow. I've already had 5 more people text asking to sign up." He was right. Word spread fast in a subdivision. By the end of the week, I had 78 clients. Marcus recruited his roommate Dave, who also had a truck with a plow. We formed an unofficial team, coordinating through a group chat. The next snowfall, we cleared 92 driveways in 8 hours. The one after that, 106. People loved that we showed up within hours of the snow stopping, that we were local residents they could text directly, and that they only paid when they actually needed service. Meanwhile, Mountain Peak was struggling. Without the mandatory pool guaranteeing payment, Karen's husband had lost his reliable income stream. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he'd tried to match our prices, but by then, we'd built loyalty. 2 weeks after the emergency meeting, Linda called me. "Adam, I need to ask you something. How many clients do you have now?" 123. "We picked up more after that last storm." She was quiet for a moment. That's more than half the subdivision. I know. The HOA contracted with Mountain Peak through March, but nobody's using them. Gregory Newman is threatening to sue for breach of contract. What does the contract say? That's the thing. I've been going through Karen's files. There is no written contract. Just an email exchange where she said we'd use them. That's not a contract. That's what our lawyer said too, but Gregory's making noise about damages and lost revenue. I thought about it. He can't claim damages if homeowners chose not to use a service they weren't legally required to use. Especially after the conflict of interest came to light. Will you come to the next board meeting and explain that? Having someone who actually understands this stuff would help. The board meeting was the following Tuesday. Only about 20 residents showed up this time, including several of my clients. Gregory Newman was there too, a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit. He looked exactly like someone who'd married Karen. My company has lost significant revenue due to this situation, he began when Linda gave him the floor. We staffed appropriately based on the HOA's commitment. Now, we're facing financial hardship because residents were encouraged to breach that commitment. There was no commitment, I said. There was Karen telling people they had to use your service, which wasn't true. Gregory's eyes narrowed. And who are you? Adam Olson. I'm the guy who's been clearing driveways for half the subdivision. Ah, the troublemaker, the competition, I corrected. You're operating an unlicensed business. Do you have proper insurance? A business license? Have you filed the appropriate paperwork with the state? I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't thought about any of that. Linda intervened. This isn't the forum for that discussion. Gregory, the HOA has no legal obligation to Mountain Peak. If you want to pursue this, you'll need to do so through your own legal channels. Oh, I intend to. He looked directly at me. And I'll be filing a complaint with the city about your unlicensed operation. After he left, I sat in my car feeling sick. Marcus called me 20 minutes later. Dude, are we in trouble? I don't know. Maybe. What do we do? I took a deep breath. We do it right. Business license, insurance, the whole thing. The next day, I went to the city offices and started the process of registering a legitimate business. It turned out to be less complicated than I'd feared. I filed for an LLC called Maple Ridge Snow Services, got a business license, and spent 2 hours on the phone with insurance companies getting quotes for liability coverage. The insurance was expensive, but when I broke down the numbers, we were still profitable. Marcus, Dave, and I became official partners, splitting expenses and revenue 3 ways. We opened a business bank account, set up a simple website, and even ordered magnetic signs for our vehicles. Within a week, we were completely legitimate. 2 days after that, I got a cease and desist letter from Mountain Peak's lawyer. It claimed we were engaging in unfair business practices, poaching clients, and defaming Mountain Peak's reputation. It demanded we stop operations immediately. I called a lawyer friend from college who worked in business litigation. After I explained the situation, he laughed. This is garbage. You can't poach clients who were never legally bound to use another service, and if you haven't defamed anyone, there's no case. Do you want me to respond? How much will that cost for you? $200. I'll write a nice letter explaining that they don't have standing and should kindly pound sand. His letter apparently worked because I never heard from Mountain Peak's lawyer again, but Karen wasn't done. 3 weeks after being removed as HOA president, she filed a formal complaint with the board claiming I was running a commercial business from my residence, in violation of HOA covenants. The covenants did prohibit running businesses that generated traffic, noise, or nuisances from residential properties. Linda called me before the hearing. She's technically not wrong. The covenants do restrict business operations. I'm not running the business from my house. I store my snowblower in my garage, which I do anyway. All the actual work happens on other people's property. That's a good argument, but you should prepare a defense. The hearing was on a Wednesday evening. Karen showed up with a binder full of documentation. Printed screenshots of our website. Photos of Marcus's truck parked in my driveway. A log of times she'd seen us conducting business operations in the subdivision. Mr. Olson has turned our peaceful neighborhood into a commercial zone, she argued. He's operating a business in violation of our covenants, and he's profiting from relationships he built as a resident. I'm clearing snow, I said, which I do anyway for my own property. I'm just doing it for my neighbors too. There's no traffic, no noise beyond normal snow removal, and no impact on the community. You're charging money. That makes it a business. So if I hired a teenager to mow my lawn and he mowed other lawns on the street, he'd be violating the covenants. Karen's jaw tightened. That's different. How? He's not an adult homeowner exploiting his position. Linda cut in. Karen, do you have specific damages? Has anyone complained about noise, traffic, or disruption? The principle is what matters. Bob, who'd been quietly reviewing documents, spoke up. Actually, I've been looking at past board decisions. We approved a resident running a piano teaching business from her home 5 years ago. We approved another resident doing accounting services. Both were commercial operations that generated income. Karen's face flushed. Those were different circumstances. Were they, or is this just personal? The room fell silent. Finally, Linda said, I'm not seeing grounds to prohibit Adam's snow removal service. He's not generating inappropriate traffic or disturbance. Motion to dismiss. Second, Bob said immediately. The vote was 4-1, with only one board member siding with Karen. I suspected that member was her friend. After the hearing, Tom pulled me aside. She's going to keep coming after you. You know that, right? Probably. Be careful, Karen doesn't lose gracefully. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 code enforcement visits to my house. Each time, an inspector showed up saying they'd received complaints about various violations. Grass too long in the summer, even though it was winter and there was snow on the ground. Unauthorized structure in my backyard, which turned out to be a bird feeder. Commercial vehicle parked in my driveway, which was Marcus's personal truck that happened to have a plow attachment. Every complaint was dismissed as frivolous, but it was harassment, and we both knew it. Then the anonymous reviews started appearing online. 1-star reviews on Google, Yelp, Facebook, claiming Maple Ridge Snow Services had damaged driveways, been rude to customers, and overcharged. None of it was true, and none of the reviewers could be verified as actual clients. I spent hours responding to each review, politely explaining that we had no record of serving these customers and inviting them to contact us directly to resolve any issues. Real clients started leaving positive reviews to counteract the fake ones. Eventually, the platforms removed the suspicious reviews for violating their terms of service, but the stress was getting to me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Marcus noticed during one of our snow removal runs. You look exhausted, man. I am. This is getting ridiculous. Why don't we just quit, find clients outside the subdivision? I thought about it. Because that's what she wants. She wants us to give up and disappear so she can say she was right. Is it worth it? I looked around at the neighborhood, at Mrs. Patterson's house, where I'd cleared her driveway 3 times now and she'd waved from her window each time. At Tom's place, where he'd mentioned I'd saved him from throwing out his back. At Jennifer's house, where her kids had built a snowman in the yard I'd cleared. Yeah, I said, It is. In early March, Linda called an official HOA meeting to present the results of Bob's financial audit. I almost didn't go, tired of the constant drama, but Tom convinced me. "You'll want to hear this," he said mysteriously. The clubhouse was packed again. Karen sat in the back, her expression neutral but her posture rigid. Linda stood at the front with Bob, both looking serious. "Thank you all for coming," Linda began. "Bob has completed a comprehensive review of HOA finances for the past 5 years. What he found is deeply concerning." Bob stood and began clicking through a presentation on a laptop connected to a projector. Numbers filled the screen. Spreadsheets, bank statements, invoices. Over the past 5 years, approximately $85,000 in HOA funds cannot be properly accounted for, Bob said. There are payments to vendors that don't exist, reimbursements without receipts, and transfers to accounts that aren't properly documented. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "The security assessment from last year," Bob continued. $35,000 collected. No security system installed. The vendor supposedly went out of business, but there's no record of any deposit being made. The money went into the HOA account, then was transferred out to an account labeled Project Management, which appears to be controlled by the president. All eyes turned to Karen. The playground equipment assessment from 3 years ago, $28,000. Again, no equipment, no proper documentation of where the money went. "This is absurd," Karen said, standing up. "Those were legitimate expenses." Project management, consulting fees, administrative costs. "Then where's the documentation?" Bob asked calmly. "Where are the receipts, the contracts, the invoices? I don't have to sit here and be accused of theft." "Nobody's accusing you of anything," Linda said carefully. "We're just presenting what the audit found. If you have documentation that explains these discrepancies, we'd love to see it." Karen grabbed her purse. "My lawyer will be in touch." She stormed out for what felt like the 100th time. After she left, the meeting turned into a discussion of next steps. Someone suggested filing a police report. Another person mentioned a civil lawsuit to recover the funds. Linda agreed to consult with the HOA's lawyer about the best course of action. I sat there feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I'd never liked Karen, but I hadn't wanted it to come to this. 2 weeks later, I was clearing snow from Mrs. Patterson's driveway when I saw the police car pull up to Karen's house. 2 officers went to the door. Karen answered. They talked for a few minutes, then she got into the back of the patrol car. Tom called me an hour later. "Did you hear? I saw the police at her house. She's been arrested. Embezzlement. The HOA filed charges after their lawyer reviewed everything." I sat down heavily on my porch steps. Wow. Apparently, once they started digging, they found even more. She'd been skimming from the regular dues too, just small amounts each month that added up over time. The total is over $100,000. What about Gregory? Unclear if he was involved. They're investigating. The news spread through Maple Ridge Estates like wildfire. Some people were shocked. Others said they'd suspected something was off for years. A few actually felt sorry for Karen, but most were just angry. The legal process moved slowly. Karen was released on bail but resigned from the HOA board completely. Gregory's business quietly closed. They put their house up for sale within a month. Meanwhile, Maple Ridge snow services continued to grow. We'd expanded beyond just snow removal, offering spring yard cleanup and summer lawn care. By April, we had 170 regular clients, and we'd started getting calls from neighboring subdivisions. Marcus quit his day job to run the business full-time. Dave brought on his brother to help with the increased workload. We rented a small storage unit for equipment and incorporated as a proper LLC with an operating agreement. In May, the HOA held elections for a new permanent board. Linda decided not to run for president, saying she'd done her duty. Tom threw his hat in the ring and won easily. One of his first acts was to officially recognize Maple Ridge Snow Services as a preferred vendor for residents, though still completely optional. One afternoon, I was updating our website when Tom knocked on my door. "Got a minute, always." "What's up?" He handed me an envelope. "The HOA wanted to thank you, officially." Inside was a letter from the board expressing gratitude for bringing important issues to light and demonstrating community service and integrity. It was signed by all 5 board members. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "We wanted to. You could have just paid the $300 and kept your head down like everyone else. Instead, you stood up and fought back. That took guts." "I just didn't like being told what to do." Tom laughed. "Well, your stubbornness saved this HOA from years more of embezzlement. Karen would have kept going if you hadn't exposed the snow pool scheme." After he left, I sat on my porch with Rex, looking out at the subdivision. Spring was turning everything green. Kids were riding bikes in the street. Neighbors were working in their yards. I thought about that first confrontation with Karen, how angry I'd been at the mandatory snow pool. How I'd never imagined it would lead to uncovering fraud, starting a business, and fundamentally changing how the HOA operated. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Just got a call from Sunrise Heights subdivision. They want a quote for snow removal next winter. 50 homes," I texted back. "Let's set up a meeting." In June, Karen's trial began. I was called as a witness to testify about the snow pool scheme and how it had led to the discovery of the financial irregularities. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, and Karen looked diminished sitting at the defense table in a gray suit. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The missing security assessment funds, the playground equipment money, the systematic skimming from monthly dues, the project management accounts that existed only on paper. When they added it all up, Karen had embezzled $137,000 over 5 years. Her defense argued that it was poor bookkeeping, not theft. That Karen had used the money for legitimate HOA purposes but failed to maintain proper records. The jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to repay the full amount plus penalties and interest. Gregory was investigated but not charged, though the civil lawsuits from the HOA were ongoing. I felt no satisfaction watching her led away in handcuffs. Just a tired relief that it was over. By the time winter rolled around again, Maple Ridge Snow Services had contracts with 4 subdivisions covering over 600 homes. We'd hired 8 employees, bought 2 more trucks with plows, and leased a proper office space with equipment storage. Marcus handled operations, Dave managed the crews, and I focused on business development and client relations. We were making real money, enough that I'd cut back my web design work to part-time. The first significant snowfall of the season came in November. Our crews deployed at dawn, coordinating through a new app we developed that let clients request service and track our progress in real time. By noon, we'd cleared 420 driveways. I was finishing up a property in Maple Ridge Estates when Mrs. Patterson came out with a thermos of hot chocolate. "You boys work so hard," she said. "It's wonderful having reliable service." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. We appreciate you. You know, I never trusted that Karen woman. Always had a feeling she was up to something. I'm glad you stood up to her." After she went back inside, I stood in her driveway, looking around at the neighborhood. The same streets where Karen had tried to force everyone into her husband's mandatory service. The same houses where residents had felt powerless against HOA overreach. It was all so different now. Tom had implemented new financial controls and transparency measures. Board meetings were actually productive. Residents felt heard and respected. And we'd built a thriving business based on voluntary choice and quality service. My phone rang. It was Jennifer, one of our original clients. "Adam, I just recommended you to my sister's neighborhood. She's on their HOA board and they're looking for snow removal options." "Thanks, Jennifer. Have her call the office and we'll set something up." That evening, Marcus, Dave, and I met at a local restaurant to celebrate the successful first day of the season. We reviewed numbers, discussed logistics for the next storm, and planned our expansion strategy. "Never thought that fight with the HOA would turn into this," Marcus said, raising his beer. "Me neither," I admitted. "What would you have done if she'd actually been able to enforce the mandatory pool?" Dave asked. I thought about it. "Probably paid and been bitter about it." Sometimes standing up to bullies takes you places you never expected. The next morning, I was working from home when a news van pulled up to Karen's old house. The new owners had moved in a few weeks earlier, a young couple with a toddler. I watched through my window as a reporter did a stand-up in front of the house, probably doing some follow-up story on the embezzlement case. My doorbell rang. It was the reporter, a woman in her 30s with a microphone. "Adam Olson. I'm Rachel Chen from Channel 7 News. I'm doing a story about the HOA embezzlement case and how it came to light. Do you have a few minutes?" I hesitated. I'd stayed out of the media during the trial, not wanting the attention, but maybe it was important for other people to hear what happened. "Sure," I said. We sat on my porch, and she asked me to walk through the whole story. The mandatory snow pool, discovering the conflict of interest, the emergency meeting, starting my own service, and eventually the revelation of the broader fraud. What would you say to other homeowners dealing with HOA problems? She asked. Read your bylaws, know your rights, and don't be afraid to push back when something doesn't seem right. HOAs can be great when they're run properly, but they require oversight and accountability like any organization. You've turned this into quite a successful business. That was never the goal. I just wanted to clear my own driveway without being forced into an overpriced mandatory service. Everything else came from that. The story aired that evening. My phone started ringing with interview requests from other outlets. The Denver Post wanted to do a feature. A local business magazine wanted to include us in their Entrepreneurs to Watch section. I declined most of them. We'd gotten enough attention, and I wanted to focus on running the business, not being a media personality. In December, Tom called me to his house. When I arrived, I found several other neighbors there, including Linda, Bob, Patricia, and about a dozen others. "What's going on?" I asked. Tom grinned. "We wanted to officially thank you. You saved this HOA literally and figuratively." He handed me a plaque. It read, "Presented to Adam Olson in recognition of integrity, courage, and service to the Maple Ridge Estates community." I felt my throat tighten. "This is too much." "It's not enough," Linda said. "You risked conflict and harassment to do the right thing. That matters." We spent the evening sharing stories about the crazy year we'd had. Someone brought up the time Karen had tried to ban Rex. Another person remembered her campaign to prohibit basketball hoops in driveways. Patricia mentioned the great lamppost controversy of 2 years ago when Karen had insisted all exterior lighting meet specific lumens requirements. "It's weird," I said. "Part of me almost feels bad for her. She clearly had some kind of problem." "She had a greed problem," Bob said. "And a control problem. Don't waste your sympathy." Tom raised his glass. To new beginnings, and to actually reading the bylaws. Everyone laughed and drank to that. By January, Maple Ridge Snow Services had 740 clients across 6 subdivisions. We'd weathered 3 major storms, maintained a 98% customer satisfaction rating, and turned a healthy profit. We were looking at adding spring landscaping services and possibly expanding to commercial properties. I was in the office reviewing contracts when Marcus burst in, waving his phone. "Dude, you're not going to believe this. Sunrise Heights just fired their HOA president for trying to implement a mandatory snow removal pool." I started laughing. "You're kidding." "Nope. Apparently, she tried to use our old neighborhood as an example of why it was a good idea." Residents Googled it, found the news stories about Karen's embezzlement, and revolted. They want to hire us instead. Of course they do. We added Sunrise Heights to our client list, bringing our total coverage to over 900 homes. At this rate, we'd need to hire more crews and buy additional equipment before next season. That night, I sat in my home office updating spreadsheets and reviewing schedules. Rex was asleep at my feet. Through the window, I could see the subdivision quiet and peaceful under a fresh blanket of snow. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. "Thank you for clearing my driveway so quickly. You boys are wonderful. I made cookies if you want to stop by." I smiled and texted back that I'd be there in the morning. A year ago, I'd been a guy who just wanted to use his own snowblower without being forced into a mandatory service. Now, I was running a business with 8 employees, serving nearly 1,000 clients, and had inadvertently helped expose HOA fraud that had stolen over $100,000 from my community. Life was funny that way. My email dinged. It was from Tom with the subject line "board position." I opened it. "Adam, we're expanding the HOA board from 5 to 7 members to improve oversight. Several residents have suggested you'd be a great addition. Interested. No pressure, but you'd bring a valuable perspective." I sat back, considering it. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. But now, having seen how much damage one bad actor could do and how much good a functional board could accomplish, I understood why it mattered. I typed back, "Let me think about it." Then I closed my laptop, called Rex, and went outside. The night was cold and clear, stars bright above the suburban sprawl. I walked through the neighborhood, past houses where my service had cleared driveways, past the clubhouse where we'd voted Karen out, past the spot where she'd first confronted me about the mandatory pool. It had been a hell of a year. Exhausting, stressful, occasionally frightening, but ultimately worth it. We'd built something real. Not just a business, but a community that actually functioned the way it was supposed to. When I got home, I opened my laptop and responded to Tom's email. "Okay. I'm in." Because sometimes standing up to bullies and doing the right thing meant accepting responsibility for keeping things right. And after everything we'd been through, I owed it to this community to help make sure nothing like Karen's embezzlement could happen again. The next morning, I was drinking coffee when Marcus called. "Emergency. We've got a massive storm coming in tomorrow, 12 to 18 inches. Every client is going to need service. Call everyone in. We'll run multiple shifts if we have to. Already on it. Just wanted to give you a heads up." I hung up and looked at Rex. "Ready for a busy day, buddy?" He wagged his tail, which was basically his answer to everything. The storm hit hard, just like the forecast predicted. We worked in shifts around the clock, crews rotating every 6 hours to prevent exhaustion. I ran snowblower duty from dawn until mid-afternoon, then switched to logistics and coordination from the office. By the end of the second day, we'd cleared every single client property. Not one complaint, not one missed service. Our phones were ringing with new sign-up requests from people impressed by our responsiveness. Standing in my garage at midnight, exhausted and sore, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what business should be. Providing real value, treating people fairly, building trust through consistent quality. Everything Karen's mandatory pool scheme hadn't been. In February, the HOA held its annual meeting to review finances and vote on initiatives. Tom presented a transparent budget with clear line items and accountability measures. Every expense over $500 now required board approval with documentation. Monthly financial statements would be posted online for all residents. "We learned some hard lessons last year," Tom said. "But we're stronger for it. This HOA works for you, not the other way around." The measures passed unanimously. Afterward, I was voted onto the board along with a woman named Susan who worked in nonprofit management. My first board meeting was surreal, sitting at the same table where Karen had once held court. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" Linda said, noticing my expression. She'd agreed to stay on as treasurer. "Very. You'll do great. Just remember why you're here." Over the next few months, I helped implement new policies around vendor selection, requiring competitive bids and conflict of interest disclosures. We established a reserve fund with transparent accounting. We created a resident feedback system that actually got reviewed and addressed. Maple Ridge Snow Services continued growing. By the time spring arrived, we'd expanded to 9 subdivisions and 1,200 clients. We added lawn care, yard cleanup, and basic landscaping to our service offerings. Revenue projections for the year were approaching $500,000. Marcus and Dave were talking about opening a second location to serve the south suburbs. I was designing the expansion strategy while still maintaining my board position and doing occasional web design work. Life was busy, but good. One afternoon in April, I was at the office when our receptionist told me someone was there to see me. I walked out to find Gregory Newman standing in the waiting area. He looked older than I remembered, tired and worn down. "Mr. Olson, I was hoping we could talk." I considered telling him to leave, but curiosity won. "My office." We sat across from each other, an awkward silence filling the space. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Gregory said finally. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. I didn't know about the embezzlement." Karen handled all the HOA finances, and I just ran my business. When she told me about the snow removal contract, I thought it was legitimate. I had no idea she was forcing people or that she'd hidden our relationship. "Did you know about the other stuff? The security assessment, the playground equipment?" "No, I swear. When it all came out, I was as shocked as anyone." He rubbed his face. "My marriage is over. My business is gone. I'm working as a contractor for someone else's company now. Everything we built is destroyed." "That's unfortunate. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I genuinely didn't know, and I wanted to apologize for threatening you with legal action. That was wrong." I studied him, trying to gauge sincerity. He seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. "Okay," I said. "Apology noted." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing, standing up to her, exposing what was happening. I wish I'd paid more attention. Maybe I could have stopped it." After he left, I sat thinking about the ripple effects of that first confrontation over the mandatory snow pool. Karen in prison. Gregory's life in ruins. A community transformed. A business born. Lives changed in ways none of us could have predicted. Sometimes doing the right thing had consequences far beyond what you could imagine. In June, we held a 1-year anniversary celebration for Maple Ridge Snow Services. We rented a pavilion at a local park and invited all our clients, employees, and supporters. Over 300 people showed up. Tom gave a speech about how our business represented the best of community entrepreneurship. Mrs. Patterson presented us with a giant card signed by 87 clients. Marcus's mom made a cake decorated with tiny frosting snowflakes. Standing there, surrounded by people we'd served and worked with, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, I'd been angry about being forced into a mandatory service. Now, I was running a successful business built on choice, quality, and community trust. Speech, someone called out. I reluctantly took the microphone. I'm not great at speeches, but I want to thank everyone who believed in us when we were just a guy with a snowblower and an attitude problem. Laughter rippled through the crowd. We started this because I was stubborn and didn't like being told what to do. We grew it because you all took a chance on us, and we'll keep building it by staying true to what made us successful. Honest service, fair prices, and actually caring about the people we work for. Thank you. The applause was genuine and warm. Rex, who'd been running around playing with kids, came and sat next to me. I scratched his ears and he looked up at me with pure adoration. "We did good, buddy," I whispered. As the party wound down and the sun set over Denver, I talked with clients and neighbors, hearing their stories and feedback. Everyone had opinions about what services we should add, which neighborhoods we should expand to, how we could improve. I took notes, genuinely interested in their ideas. This business belonged to the community in a way that Karen's mandatory pool never could have. Because it was built on willing participation and mutual benefit, not coercion and self-dealing. That was the difference between serving people and exploiting them. Later that evening, back home, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the neighborhood. Kids playing street hockey, couples walking dogs, Tom working in his garden, the mundane beauty of suburban life. My phone buzzed. Email from a subdivision in Aurora asking for a quote for snow removal next season. 560 homes. I smiled and flagged it to follow up in the morning. A year ago, all I'd wanted was to clear my own driveway in peace. Instead, I'd exposed fraud, transformed an HOA, built a successful business, and helped create a model for how communities could function with transparency and accountability. Not bad for a guy who just didn't like being told what to do. Rex came and rested his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears, and he made that contented sound dogs make when they're perfectly happy. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for another year?" His tail thumped against the porch boards. I took that as a yes. The stars were coming out now, visible despite the suburban light pollution. Somewhere, Karen was in prison. Gregory was rebuilding his life. The HOA was functioning properly for the first time in years, and I was sitting on my porch, dog at my side, planning the future of a business I'd never intended to start. Life had a funny way of working out when you stood your ground and did the right thing, even when it would have been easier to just pay the $300 and move on. I finished my beer, called Rex inside, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring more work, more growth, more challenges. But tonight, I just enjoy the satisfaction of knowing we'd turned something corrupt and wrong into something honest and good. And really, that was worth more than any amount of snow removal revenue could ever be.